DJ Premier versus Pete Rock, two pioneers of sampling. But what happened when both flipped the exact same sample? Well, today we're putting their beats side by side to see who came out on top. You're about to see a side of their genius that's never been shown before. So let's settle this once and for all and find out who sampled it better. In this video, we're going to break down how both of these legends made beats using the exact same sample, the different sampling techniques they used, and even some ideas you can use for your own beats. So let's start off by looking at the sample itself. A cool jazz song from the 70s full of these amazing sounding keys, bouncy bass, and some light drums. And when we break down the beats using this sample, you'll see that Primo and Pete use this in completely different ways. Let's start by looking at DJ Premier's beat when he used this sample for Jeru the Damage's Me or the Papes. Now it might not seem like it, but this beat has some unique and bizarre sampling techniques that most beginners would never dare to try. Let me show you what I mean. For most producers, when they load up their sample, the first thing that they do is line up the sample's BPM with their beat's BPM. And here, DJ Premier's beat was made at 85 BPM. So most producers would take the sample, which has a BPM of 78 right now, and they would shrink it so it fits at 85 BPM. But that's not what DJ Premier does for this beat, not at all. Instead, he does the opposite. He takes the sample and he stretches it, so now the sample is even slower and further away from his beat's BPM. And as you can hear, the sample is now way off, even more than before. So you might be thinking, how does DJ Premier make this stretched out version of the sample work for his beat? Well, the way he's able to get this to work is by using what's known as the stop and go technique, where he chops the sample up in a unique way that you may have never tried before yourself. This is a technique that I've actually covered on my channel, which I will link at the end of this video if you want to watch it. But to do this technique, first we'll need to add drums to introduce some structure. And now when we chop the sample up, we'll create gaps in between the sample chops that will create this stop and go feel. By doing this, we gain control of the rhythm of these notes in the sample. So now the sample won't go way off and sound like a complete mess if we do this right. So take a listen to see what I mean. This is the first piece of the sample that DJ Premier uses. Then he actually creates a chop partway through this piece, and he uses this as his second chop. And as you can hear, it sounds good because of these gaps in between the chops. They help create a rhythm that actually fits. And as an experiment, if these gaps didn't exist and we just let the sample play, you can hear this starts to sound like a mess. So from here, we see DJ Premier continue to use this same approach, cutting partway through a prior chop and then using this as his next chop. But as soon as the sample starts to get too offbeat, like near the end here, he cuts this end piece off. And then finally, he does the same thing again using the piece of the prior chop as his next, where we have this last chop that gets repeated. Now, when you do the stop and go technique, the risk is that the beat can at times sound too empty because of these gaps. So DJ Premier figures out a creative way to prevent this problem from happening by using this cash register sound effect as a way to fill the space. A fantastic beat by DJ Premier, but is it better than Pete Rock's? Let's look at what Pete did with this exact same sample on the beat for Nas called The World Is Yours. The world is this. The world is yours. The world is yours. And in this beat, we see Pete Rock using his staple sampling technique. Let me show you what that is. This is the part of the sample that gets used here. And And like we talked about earlier, Pete Rock uses this more common sampling approach of getting your sample to line up with the BPM of the beat that you're making, which in this case is 87 BPM. But as you probably noticed, this isn't the actual loop that Pete Rock uses for his beat, and this is what makes his beat so interesting. Instead of using this as his loop, Pete Rock cuts the chop early. Instead of using the end piece of this chop, he actually uses an earlier part of the sample before this. Making the loop point of the sample happen partway through the beat. And this is just something that you don't really see often. It's a really cool idea and the beat sounds much better because of this decision. From here, we have the drums. But we also have some Pete Rock-esque layering happening in this beat, where he takes this horn stab from an entirely different sample and he layers this underneath the snare, making this beat sound much more complete, full, and colorful. Probably a top 20 beat of all time in my opinion, a bit more simple with how the sample is used, but the phenomenal beat is the end result. But wait, before you decide who sampled it better, how about I see if I can compete against these two sampling icons? I'm also gonna make a beat using this sample and you can let me know if it's anywhere near as good as these beats. Probably not, but let's try anyways. So to start, I have to figure out what part of the sample I wanna use. There are a few cool ideas in this sample. I like this part here. A lot of this sample has these fast moving keys, which I'm a bit worried are going to be hard to control. It may make the beat sound overly busy, so let's see if I can find a way to slow this sample down. So this is going to help this part of the sample be more usable, but honestly, I'm a bit worried that this beat is going to end up just feeling like a regular piano type beat. So let me continue to search around the sample to see what else is in here. That sounds alright. This part of the sample feels too full with these drums. This part actually sounds pretty cool. Now, another experimental technique I like to try every once in a while is to play my sample like a chord. This is usually only possible if the sample is extremely simple, if it's just one or two notes playing, but it can have some pretty interesting end results if it works. This sounds really cool. Let me fill in these open gaps with a couple other notes, and I think we have ourselves a loop. And again, just to make this point, if we listen to this exact same part of the sample that we ended up using without all this experimenting, this is how it sounds. Not all that interesting of a texture, but with some simple stretching and repitching, you can create some amazing sounding textures even inside of a simple sounding sample like this. Now obviously this sample needs more, it doesn't feel full enough right now. So let's open up a simple Fender Rhodes and add this in. And to figure out what pattern I should build, I will use Note Grabber to see all the notes in the sample. Full disclosure, this is my plugin that I created. You can download and try this for free, by the way. Link is in the description box below if you're interested. And what I'll do is use the information that Note Grabber is showing me to draw in a chord that will fit perfectly with my sample. Alright, let's bring these notes into my Fender Rhodes by just dragging and dropping this in. But before I listen to how this sounds, there is one key detail that I need to make sure I fix. Looking at Note Grabber, after I drew in these notes, you probably noticed that the notes in the sample actually sit a tiny bit lower than these pitch perfect notes that I drew in. What this is telling me is that the sample is not pitch perfect. So to get my sounds that I'm gonna add to my sample to actually fit with my sample, I'll need to adjust their pitch to be slightly lower. Here's how it sounds before. Now to get it to fit, I will drop this down a few cents. Now let's take a listen. Cool, I like how this idea is sounding. It feels eerie, but there's a bit more of a mess that I ended up making in this beat. Since I played this sample like a chord, that means this loop has multiple basses from the sample playing at the same time. So the low end sounds like an absolute mess. Plus, since I plan on creating my own bass line, I'm gonna need to EQ this sample. And for my bass line, I think something much more simple would fit. From here, I'm going to bring in my own melodic pattern using the same Fender Rhodes but played at a higher pitch. And now with some dusty drums from my own drum pack, I have a full beat. So if you're a producer and you use samples, check out my plugin right next to me. It's going to help you see every note inside your samples. But if you want to watch that DJ Premier video that I mentioned earlier to upgrade your sampling skills and learn one of his techniques, click this other box next to me. Which box will you choose? I have no idea, but I hope you make the right decision. The fate of the world is in your hands. Click one of these boxes.